On the surface, the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft, Remarkable Paper Pro, and Boox Note Air 5C looked like close relatives. Color e-ink, built for note-taking, and sitting in a similar size and price range. But once you spend a few minutes with them, that they're basically the same impression falls apart quickly. These devices make very different trade-offs: how they handle color, how they feel to write on, what their software lets you do, and what kind of workflow they're actually built for. And that's a trap. You buy one assuming they're basically interchangeable and end up disappointed because you accidentally picked the wrong philosophy. If you just want a quick answer before we go deeper, here's the upfront summary. If you want one device that can flex into a bunch of roles, notes, reading, PDFs, apps, and a workflow that mostly manages to adapt to you, the Boox Note Air 5C is what I'd call a platform device. It's the most flexible option thanks to Android and Google Play. But that openness comes with a noticeably steeper learning curve. If you want a premium distraction-free notebook that's obsessively focused on writing and keeping things simple at the cost of some feature trade-offs and potentially a subscription, the Remarkable Paper Pro is the purest interpretation of that idea. And it's also the one that brings true color e-ink to the table. More on that in a second. And if reading is the main event, especially highlighting, annotating, and basically living inside your Kindle library, the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft is the strongest reader-first pick, while still being more than capable for everyday note-taking, and it delivers surprisingly strong color performance too. If that quick upfront summary helped, please like and subscribe. Now let's break down what they can and can't do, who they're really built for exactly. And let's start with the build, because that's the first clue to the very different philosophies behind these three. First off, all three feel premium, metal housings, excellent build quality, just with noticeably different haptics and ergonomics. The Boox Note Air 5C with its asymmetrical bezel is my personal favorite here. That side grip simply makes it easier to hold without constantly worrying about accidentally touching the screen. And because you can rotate it 180 degrees, it's also comfortable for lefties. The Remarkable Paper Pro goes in a different direction. The sides are symmetrical, but you get this big chin at the bottom. That's probably more of a technical necessity than an everyday advantage, because in actual use, it doesn't really change much. And because you're swiping to turn pages when reading, occasional accidental touches on the screen from the slimmer bezels aren't really an issue. The Kindle Scribe Colorsoft leans into a more modern tablet-like look with even bezels all around. And that design choice helps keep the overall footprint under control, even with the slightly larger screen compared to the previous generation. The bezels are still wide enough that accidental touches aren't really an issue for me. In terms of pure hand feel, the Boox Note Air 5C and the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft are both comfortable. Rounded corners, rounded edges, easy to hold. The book still edges it out just a little for me, mainly because of that grip. The Remarkable Paper Pro trails behind a bit here. It feels like the company went with a more design-driven, clean-cut approach. Great looking, very minimalist, but the trade-off is that it simply doesn't feel quite as pleasant in the hand as the other two. Besides the device's design, with a weight of just 390 grams, the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft is noticeably easier to hold than the books at around 440 grams and the Remarkable Paper Pro at roughly 520 grams. And in real use, that difference adds up, especially for longer reading sessions, so the Kindle ends up being the most comfortable one to hold for reading. But holding them is only part of the story. As note-taking tablets, you'll put these down on a desk a lot. And that's where another difference shows up. Kindle and Remarkable use rubber feet on the back, so they feel more stable and don't slide around as much, while the book sits directly on its aluminum back and tends to move around more easily. So overall, the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft feels like the most balanced build, well-rounded and easy to live with. But honestly, all three are close enough that a lot of this comes down to what you value most: grip comfort, minimalist design, or that more traditional tablet feel. Now, when it comes to writing feel and performance, the differences get even more obvious. The Remarkable Paper Pro is the odd one out here. It uses capacitive pen technology. It works fine, but it's not as precise as what you get with EMR technology on the other two. The most noticeable side effect is that diagonal lines can look a little wobbly. For regular note-taking, that's usually not a big deal, but if you like to sketch, you'll probably notice it. And unlike the other two, the pen does need charging. But at least it charges automatically when it's attached to the side. But it's still one more thing to keep in mind if you don't always store it there, and potentially down the road if battery wear becomes a factor. The Kindle Scribe Colorsoft and Boox Note Air 5C, on the other hand, both use Wacom EMR pens. Those are passive styluses, so there's nothing to charge. EMR is also more accurate, So the wobbly line issue is basically non-existent on these two. And if you want to fine-tune the writing feel, you can swap the original pen for pretty much any Wacom-compatible stylus, which gives you more flexibility. That said, the included pens are still the most convenient day-to-day option because of their magnetic attachment. Boox did make a small blunder here, though. Depending on how it attaches, the pen can overlap the volume buttons on the side so that grab-it-and-go convenience gets slightly blunted by a clumsy design choice. Again, the Remarkable Paper Pro is doing things a bit differently, just not necessarily for the better. It has a textured glass surface, which definitely feels premium, but combined with the hard pen tip, you get a pretty noticeable tapping sound whenever you lift the pen and put it back down on the display. To be fair, you do get used to it after a while, and I didn't find it to be as big of a deal in the long run as I initially expected. But once you start comparing it to the other two, it's still hard to ignore that they're simply a bit more pleasant because their softer pen tips don't create that same obvious tap. All three aim for a paper-like writing feel, and honestly, none of them fully nails that. But that doesn't mean they can't be satisfying to use. Each one gives you some level of resistance and texture when writing, so this isn't that detached, glassy iPad-style experience you get on a regular tablet. And while I'm not a huge fan of Remarkable's pen tech choice, the surface feel on the Paper Pro is actually its strongest argument. It's the most tactile of the three. I'd say it comes the closest to that pencil-like feedback these devices are aiming for. The Boox Note Air 5C also has a textured display surface, but paired with the softer pen tip, it ends up feeling more like writing with a felt tip pen than a pencil. The Kindle Scribe Colorsoft is in that same direction, just with a bit less scratchiness because the display texture feels slightly less pronounced. And personally, I actually like that a lot, because it's the least conspicuous in a room full of people. Another important piece of the natural writing puzzle is pen latency. Basically, how quickly the e-ink pixels react to your pen input. Remarkable claims 12 milliseconds of writing latency, but I couldn't confirm that in my super slow motion test. In my footage, it's closer to 15 milliseconds, which is actually about 5 milliseconds better than what I measured on the original firmware at launch. And honestly, that's incredibly good. The Boox Note Air 5C comes in at around 16 milliseconds, and the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft hits that 12 millisecond mark in my test, and sometimes even slightly faster. So in terms of how immediate the writing feels, the Kindle is the most instant, with the Remarkable close behind, and the Boox not far off either. All three have 4096 pressure levels and tilt sensitivity as well. Remarkable and Kindle are especially well balanced in that regard, with Boox still being good, but you can tell that the other companies put more time and effort into optimizing that experience. Bottom line, even though all three are fairly close overall, the differences here actually matter. For me, the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft once again strikes the best balance in writing feel and performance. But just like with the build and ergonomics, it still comes down to preference. If you specifically prefer a more tactile, scratchy surface, the Remarkable Paper Pro can absolutely still be the better pick. Now let's talk about the two areas where these three devices really separate: display and software. We'll start with the screens, and there's a lot to unpack here, so I'll keep it as concise as I can. All three use e-ink, but they're using two very different approaches to color. The Remarkable Paper Pro has an 11.8-inch display and uses e-ink Gallery 3, which I like to call true color e-ink. In simple terms, e-ink works with moving particles, and in Gallery 3, those particles themselves are colored. You've got 4 pigment types in the panel: cyan, magenta, yellow, and white, and by mixing and positioning them, the display can render up to around 20,000 colors. The Kindle Scribe Colorsoft and Boox Note Air 5C have 11-inch and 10.3-inch displays respectively, and both use e-ink Kaleido 3. Here you start with a regular black and white e-ink panel. So just black and white pigments, and add a passive color filter layer on top made up of tiny red, green, and blue elements. Colors are created by selectively darkening the e-ink pixels underneath that filter, so less light is reflected through the subpixels you don't want. That approach tops out at about 4096 colors. But what matters isn't the spec sheet, it's how this looks and behaves in real use. And there are 3 things you'll notice right away: color behavior, clarity, and motion. The biggest strength of the Remarkable Paper Pro is that its colors are more reflective and natural looking indoors, especially when you're not relying on the Frontlight. Yellow in particular looks genuinely vibrant, and because the base reflectivity of Gallery 3 is better, you tend to need the Frontlight less overall, and the paper-like character of the screen is preserved better. Kaleido 3 on the Kindle and Boox behaves differently. You'll usually get stronger greens, and most colors, except yellow, can look a bit more punchy once you add light. The trade-off is that the screen looks noticeably darker without the Frontlight. personally, I don't think that's a huge deal, because I use the Frontlight on black and white devices too, and I also end up using it on the Paper Pro throughout the day. But with Kaleido 3, the Frontlight is basically non-negotiable indoors, which is why I'm showing these two mostly with the light turned on in this video. But if you're someone who hates using the built-in light, these two are simply harder to recommend. The Paper Pro is also a bit darker than pure black and white e-ink, like the older Remarkable 2, but it's a smaller shift. So the L star value on the Paper Pro, which is a measure of perceived brightness that I measured with my spectrophotometer, lands right between pure black and white e-ink and Kaleido 3. When it comes to how colors are constructed, Gallery 3 shows visible dithering with colored content. When you look closely, Kaleido 3 doesn't have that same dithering look, but it brings its own thing. With Kaleido 3, you can sometimes perceive the RGB subpixel matrix as a very slight grain, depending on viewing distance and your sensitivity to it. The important nuance here is the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft does an exceptional job minimizing this to the point where it's almost not worth mentioning. On the Boox Note Air 5C, it's definitely more noticeable. And broadly speaking, Kaleido 3 can reduce that classic raw e-ink e-paper vibe a bit, because you're literally looking through a filter layer. Again, the Kindle is the best example I've seen of a Kaleido 3 display that still feels clean and convincing when turning up the Frontlight just a tiny bit. So not that big of a deal with the Amazon device. In fact, the Scribe Colorsoft currently has the best display quality of any e-ink Kaleido 3 screen I've seen so far. But besides that, one thing to keep in mind, on all three, colors look muted compared to LCD or OLED. You get used to that pretty quickly once you stop comparing side by side, but it's still worth knowing going in. Another thing that changes the whole feel of the screen is contrast, how much the text stands out and how deep blacks look. And here, Kaleido 3 is simply stronger, especially when turning up the Frontlight to brighter levels. On the Kindle and Boox, blacks look much closer to actual black, while on the Gallery 3 display, black can lean more toward a very dark blue. It's not a deal breaker, but side by side, text just has more pop on the Kaleido 3 devices. Then there's ghosting. Ghosting is when you can still see faint traces of the previous screen after the content changes. This varies a lot depending on what you're doing, and all three show it to some degree, just in different ways. I'd say ghosting is the only real downside of the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft's hardware. With plain text, it's basically not an issue, but with color content, it's a bit more noticeable than on the Boox. Mainly because Boox gives you much finer control over how the screen refreshes. So on the Note Air 5C, you can actively tune the refresh behavior to the content, while the Kindle handles it automatically. Usually with a good balance, but just not best in class. And the Remarkable Paper Pro is a bit mixed. It tends to look quite good with images, but in the UI it can leave more visible remnants behind, which partly clear automatically, but generally ghosting can be more noticeable there, depending on what you're doing and how often the screen decides to fully refresh. Another somewhat obvious difference is the display response, because Gallery 3 is slower. You get more flicker when content updates, and when you draw colored lines, you can see that slightly odd fill-in effect before the final colors lock in with a flicker. Personally, I don't mind it, but I completely understand why some people find it distracting. With Kaleido 3 on the Kindle and Boox, the big advantage is that it's simply faster to refresh. So navigating, switching content, and general movement feels cleaner. And with the Boox tablet, there's a dedicated speed mode that even lets you watch videos reasonably well. Not that you should do that on e-ink, but you could. And even though most people don't obsess over Frontlights, it still matters for day-to-day comfort, especially with Kaleido 3. On the Kindle and Boox, brightness and quality are much better, with over 100 nits on both and the option to adjust color temperature. So you can use them comfortably basically anywhere, outside, indoors, daytime, night. The Remarkable Paper Pro is the odd one out again. Even with the newer higher brightness mode update, it still tops out at only 11 nits. That can feel pretty dim when you want to boost readability during the day. And even at that lower brightness, the evenness is worse than the other two. So if you're sensitive to uneven lighting, that can be a deal breaker. And that's on my warranty replaced unit. The first one I got at launch was worse. And one last practical note. Gallery 3 also seems a bit more heat sensitive. Using the Paper Pro in direct sunlight can trigger a warning and slightly slower reaction times, something I haven't run into with Kaleido 3 devices. So the quick takeaway is this: if you care most about reflective color and preserving that paper-like e-ink look, Gallery 3 on the Remarkable has a real advantage, especially indoors. If you care more about speed and versatility, faster, cleaner refresh behavior, quicker response, and brighter Frontlights you can tune warmer or cooler, then Kaleido 3 is the better fit. And the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft is without a doubt the most convincing Kaleido 3 implementation I've tested so far, even getting surprisingly close to the Remarkable Paper Pro in terms of that paper-like feel by turning up the Frontlight just a tiny bit. Software is the other big area where these three really split. And again, there's a lot to unpack. So instead of going feature by feature, it's easier to think of them as three different software identities. The Boox Note Air 5C is the platform device. It runs Android 15 with Google Play, it's packed with tools out of the box, and you can install apps and shape the device around your own workflow and needs. If you want maximum flexibility on e-ink, this is the category it lives in. The Remarkable Paper Pro is a digital notebook, and it's unapologetically that. The software is built almost entirely around handwriting, focus, and simplicity. It's not trying to be a tablet, it's not trying to be an app device, and it's not trying to be a reading hub. It's basically write, organize, and stay out of your way. And the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft is a Kindle first. Reading is the core experience. Books, highlights, annotations, and note-taking sits alongside that, mainly as a support feature for the reading workflow. So the key isn't just what they can do, it's what they're designed to be. A platform, a notebook, a reader. And once you look at them that way, the feature differences make a lot more sense, because naturally the platform device, the one you can build your workflow on, is the one that offers the broadest toolset, while the other two are much more deliberate about what they include and what they leave out. So if we start with the Boox Note Air 5C and its note-taking features, you basically get everything you could wish for and then some. It's an incredibly capable device for taking and organizing notes, and it honestly includes too many features to list in this comparison. But to name the most important ones: different pen types, colors, shapes, layers, templates and custom templates, tags, infinite scroll, an adaptable toolbar, audio recording, and a table of contents. There is some overlap with the Remarkable Paper Pro, because there's no denying Boox took inspiration from some of Remarkable's original ideas, like the infinite scroll canvas. You also get tags and layers for organizing, and Remarkable's templates are exceptionally well made. But there's no easy way to add your own templates, and overall, it's missing a lot of the features I just mentioned compared to the Boox tablet, and that's intentional. Remarkable is trying to give you enough tools to manage notes well, without cluttering the interface, and while keeping that minimalist aesthetic intact. With the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft, you can really tell it's an e-reader first because it's missing most of what I just listed. You do get different pen types and colors and some basic handling features, but there are no tags and no layers for better organization or sketching. There are different templates and they're well made, but stylistically, they're not as minimalist as on Remarkable. They're a bit more on the nose, and that's not everyone's cup of tea. You can sort notes into folders and subfolders though, which helps a lot with general organization. And that's something all three offer. And when it comes to syncing, besides each company's own cloud, all three support Google Drive and OneDrive. Remarkable also offers Dropbox, and Boox goes even further with additional options, including WebDAV. Where it can get frustrating with Remarkable though, is handwriting search. All three let you search your handwritten notes, which is incredibly useful because you can't just flip through pages like on paper. But on Remarkable, you need the Connect subscription, around $3 a month to use it. It's not a lot of money, but it's still hard to stomach paying extra for a feature that's included on the other two. And on the Boox indexing even works locally without an internet connection. And since the Remarkable Paper Pro is also the most expensive out of the three, it stings even more that an essential feature like this is locked behind a subscription. In terms of reading and annotation inside ebooks, the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft is easily the strongest of the three. It gives you multiple, well-implemented ways to annotate books, and the overall experience is something the others don't quite replicate. What Remarkable and Boox do offer, though, is direct markup. You can literally write on the page itself, which isn't how Amazon's Kindle annotation system works. But honestly, as cool as that looks, it's often not that practical, because there rarely is enough white space for proper notes. With the Kindle approach, that problem basically disappears, and it also handles things like changing font size or styling without breaking your annotations. And beyond note-taking, the Scribe Colorsoft has the usual Kindle reading features: solid, streamlined, and very easy to use. It's also the only one here that comes with a proper ebook store built in, which makes the whole reading experience just effortless. The Note Air 5C is solid for reading too, and in some areas it even offers more options, but side by side it doesn't feel quite as polished. You notice that most with things like the dictionary experience and how notes and annotations are handled inside books. And the Remarkable Paper Pro simply isn't a device made for reading ebooks. Yes, it works, but it's not a great experience. When it comes to PDF handling, the Note Air 5C is the one to get. It has by far the most flexible and simply the best viewing options. And that makes the whole PDF reading and annotating experience hard to beat. Whether it's column mode that lets you jump from zoomed in section to section, margin crop, or different scroll and layout options, there's honestly not much left to wish for on the Boox tablet. Kindle and Remarkable are more similar here. They don't offer special viewing modes, but they do have solid zooming and panning, so PDF reading and annotation are still perfectly usable. They just can't match the sheer flexibility you get on the Boox Note Air 5C. There's one odd thing with PDFs on the Kindle though. If you copy them over via USB, they'll show up, but you're basically getting a limited version, black and white, and you can't use the handwriting features. To get color and full annotation support, you need to send the PDF through one of the integrated cloud options. Before we get to battery life, let's quickly cover the everything else features that didn't really fit into the other categories. As I mentioned earlier, the Boox Note Air 5C runs Android 15 with Google Play. That means you can install apps directly from the Play Store, which instantly makes this the most powerful and versatile device of the three. Most Android apps aren't designed for e-ink, but a surprising number still work pretty well. Sometimes you just need a bit of e-ink mode tweaking, which Boox has thankfully made easier recently. But that flexibility comes with a trade-off. The learning curve on the Boox tablet is noticeably steeper. You get a ton of features and control, but it's not as immediately pick up and go as the other two, especially if you don't want to mess with settings. Boox also offers a keyboard cover. The typing feel isn't the highest quality, but if you want a compact keyboard solution, it still gets the job done. You can use it with typed notes, but also more broadly across the system, which further boosts the whole versatility angle. That said, the keyboard cover on the Remarkable Paper Pro is on another level. It's easily the more impressive one, not just because it's slim, but because of how seamlessly it integrates into the cover and how good it feels to actually type on. Unfortunately, Remarkable's software optimization for the hardware keyboard is still relatively weak. Typed text doesn't line up properly with the templates, and the overall typing experience is still pretty limited in terms of options. And I'll admit, I might be a bit biased with this last point, but one thing I genuinely appreciate about Remarkable is that it's a European company and it's ISO 27001 certified for information security management.
Data is encrypted on the device in transit and at rest, which, at least from what's communicated, isn't quite as transparent on the other two. So if you're dealing with sensitive notes and you want to sync them through the company cloud, the Remarkable Paper Pro is probably the safest bet of the three.
What Kindle does best is its ecosystem. And I know that Golden Amazon cage is also one of the main reasons people don't like Amazon's digital book empire. And rightfully so, because it creates a real lock-in effect for the content you buy. And to really take full advantage of what the device can do using Amazon's cloud-based sync options is pretty much unavoidable. But at the same time, it can be a huge advantage in day-to-day use. With Kindle Unlimited and Comixology built in, you get access to a lot of books and comics for a relatively affordable price. And the whole experience is so frictionless that it's genuinely hard to replicate on the other two. Which brings us to battery life. In my handwriting robot test with the Frontlights off, the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft came out on top with 15 hours of continuous writing, followed by the Boox Note Air 5C with 9 hours and the Remarkable Paper Pro with 7 hours. Once you turn on the lights, those numbers, unsurprisingly, drop. With the Frontlight set to 40 nits on the Kindle and Boox, which I consider the sweet spot on Kaleido 3 for comfortable readability without blasting your eyes, and the Remarkable Paper Pro set to its maximum 11 nits, the Scribe Colorsoft manages 9 hours, followed by the Boox Note Air 5C and Remarkable Paper Pro with 6 hours each. For reading, using those same settings, the results are 38 hours with the Frontlight off and 17 hours with the Frontlight on for the Kindle, 30 and 14 hours for the Boox, and 14 and 11 hours for the Remarkable. When it comes to value for money, I'd say the Boox Note Air 5C comes out best, simply because it's the cheapest of the three and still offers the most features. That said, none of these are cheap. The book sits at around $530 or €530, while the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft and Remarkable Paper Pro are both in the same ballpark at roughly $630 or around €650. One small but important detail. With the Kindle, you're getting the pen with an eraser included at that price. While on the Remarkable side, the eraser pen costs about $50 extra.
So after all, the funny part is the right choice here is actually pretty easy, as long as you're honest about what you want your pick to be. If you want the most flexible toolset and you don't mind a bit of tinkering, the Boox Note Air 5C is the one that can replace the most other devices. It's the closest thing to a regular tablet, just with the steeper learning curve baked in. If what you want is a premium digital notebook that stays focused, stays calm, and stays out of your way, the Remarkable Paper Pro still has a very unique appeal. The writing experience is tactile, the interface is minimal, and if you care about privacy and the way the company handles cloud security, it's also the most reassuring option of the three. You just have to be okay with the trade-offs and with that subscription log for handwriting search. And if your day-to-day life is mostly reading, annotating, and living inside of books, the Kindle Scribe Colorsoft is hard to beat. It's the easiest reading experience, the strongest ebook annotation system, and in the end, it's also the most grab-it-and-go option overall, while still being a generally capable note-taker, even if it doesn't have the deeper organization tools of the others. So no, these aren't interchangeable, they just look like they are, and the best way to not get burned is to pick the philosophy that matches you. Platform, notebook, or reader. If you found this comparison helpful, like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments which one you'd pick and what your main use case is, because that's actually the part I'm most curious about. Thanks for spending your time watching, and see you in the next one.